Hey, what's up guys, it's Oakley, and CA has put out a big announcement, Empire Divided and Power and Politics updates. So the Empire Divided is going to be the new DLC confirmed for Rome 2 with the Crisis of the 3rd Century, with this awesome piece of artwork here, and the Power and Politics update is going to be a piece of free DLC that accompanies its release that applies to all aspects of Rome 2, obviously revamping Power and Politics. We put up a video discussing what this does, going over all the details here, so go ahead and check out that video. But for now, we're going to be taking a look at the Empire Divided Crisis of the 3rd Century here. So it's available on November 30th, about 3 weeks from now, and it takes place in 270 AD. So this is actually well into the Crisis of the 3rd Century. I mean, you're approaching the end of the century there. This coincides with the kind of Aurelian becoming emperor, but it goes over. I mean, we've skipped over a lot of the killing and the early chaos of the Crisis of the 3rd Century. But anyways, we'll talk about that later. In terms of images, as you can see here, the first one is going to be fighting some of the Germanic tribes. So here confirmed that concept art we saw early on with the Cherushi symbol, it's going to be this guy, so therefore it does obviously mean that that piece of concept art was for this Rome 2 DLC, and we are that's another hint that's going to be removed when it comes to what that standalone saga is going to be, but we'll discuss that on another date. So yeah, we can see some of the images. So obviously this is going to be fighting against the the northwest, you could say, against the Germanic tribes, to the east against the new power of the Sassanids. Again, a lot of the units do seem to be somewhat reused from Rome 2, or maybe even Attila, I would say, because the Sassanids were in Attila. So yeah, I am familiar with these heavy infantry. These look like the mortal models that they used previously, but again, these are probably Palmyrene forces that have been reworked. So there are definitely some changes, but I wouldn't expect CA to create all the assets from scratch, so we can see a couple of them that are reused. But the generals unit here looking absolutely fantastic. I would assume this cavalry is Aurelian, commanding it, so that's pretty cool. And then you can see some UI changes to the unit cards here. CA finally admitting that, yeah, the Rome 2 approach wasn't the best, and they are going to the Attila approach, which to me, I much prefer the Attila unit cards. They look absolutely glorious and beautiful. Campaign, I'm not quite sure if they've changed kind of the color balance, but this looks a little bit different. Or perhaps it's just me being used to the Attila and Warhammer color coding, but anyways, it looks very lively, looks very good. Doesn't look like the world is falling apart from the UI colors. Then you can see some more here, tons of awesome units, new unit cards for the different queens. Here you can see down in Jerusalem. So yeah, this is pretty dope, and here we can see the map as well. So the different empires, the Palmyrene Empire down here, the breakaway Gallic Empire, Central Rome, and then I guess another power breaking out from it. So really everything being torn apart. But anyways, let's go into the patch notes now that we've looked through all the images. So what the hell are we talking about here? Well, first they say this is going to be Crisis of the 3rd Century. So it starts in 270 AD after a string of inept emperors. So yeah, after the death of Alexander Severus, basically there was a power vacuum, no clear line of succession, and so all the Roman leaders started to declare themselves. Whoever had the power to would try and claim the throne, and so you had the Roman world turned upside down in a 50-year period. I believe there was like over 60 people claiming to be an emperor, so just huge infighting, and that led to a big, turmoil. Once Rome starts fighting itself, the coffers get depleted, economy goes to whack, you get all sorts of debasement of the currency, plagues start coming out, so it's a big bad time for Rome. And as the Roman Empire is in its downfall, what ends up happening is there are breakaway kingdoms that try and say, hey, it's every man for themselves or woman for themselves. So in the west, it's going to be the Gallic Empire that we saw. Gallic Empire here to the west, and to the east, Zenobia and the Palmyrene Empire, which was actually ascendant with her father, Odenathus. And speaking of that, I'll be coming out with a documentary on this particular empire. It'll be pretty cool. But yeah, so that's kind of the preamble and the setup. So how are they going to bring this to life? Well, first is going to be the different playable factions. There are going to be 10 total, and there are going to be 5 heroic factions, which is going to be pretty sweet. But let's go over the factions. So first, the first playable factions, culture, the divided Roman Empire. So I guess that's talking about the different ones. So you get certain cultural traits for being part of one of the Romans. Defenders of civilization, more morale if you're fighting in your own or allied territory. True Roman factions share major diplomatic penalties with other Roman factions. So that's kind of weird. So as opposed to being Roman helping yourself out, it actually leads to major diplomatic penalties because you're fighting internally amongst yourself. In terms of the different kingdoms, we have Rome, just the main Roman Empire, led by Aurelian at this point. Iron Fist, minus 50% resistance to foreign occupation. He was a big conqueror. Yeah, and he kind of recouped the crisis of the 3rd century with his campaigns, really reeled the empire back from the brink of, its demise. Marching orders, 50% movement range, obviously trying to mimic the fact that he was going everywhere with his armies. Then you have the Gallic Empire, Gallic Rome faction leader Gaius Tetricus, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. Romanization, public order bonuses, administrators, minus 20% political action costs. So yeah, he's trying to form up his own empire, having a lot of Latin presence, and trying to be, he's building up his own empire. So here, this is going to be good for managing an empire. Palmyra in the east, which at this point is led by Queen Zenobia, she was supposed to be an enlightened ruler, coming actually from a well-established political family in the east, very well educated, so that is reflected in her research rate. And then piety, minus 4 banditry for each cult building. We'll get into the cult buildings here soon. And then there's many more factions, the Germanic kingdoms. I'm not going to go over all the traits, but this one is kind of interesting to point out. Terrors of the Night can always choose to fight night battles. I wonder if they've revamped kind of how night battles worked. I don't think there was an indication here. Saxones, the Gothi, Marcomanni, these guys were famous for the wars Rome fought against them. And then another culture here. This is the big one. Germanic kingdoms. So this applies to all of them. Sorry, I was thinking that was one faction. So yeah, this applies to all of them. Looters. So 3 factions falling under the Germanic kingdoms, Saxones, Gothi, and Marcomanni. And then the Eastern empires here, they all get centralized authority, so minus 5 banditry. Controlled the Silk Road, which was very important. That would actually is what led to the rise of Palmyra. 20% income from all commerce buildings, so you can be a powerhouse here. And then in terms of those factions, you get 2 different ones, Armenia and the Sassanids. I really like the fact that they included Armenia because this was, it was an area that was stuck between the Parthians or the Sassanids, so the east and the west, and this was an area where Rome and the east were always fighting over. It was like a buffer state where they were installing, puppet kings and trying to do control over it. And I like the fact that you can say, hey, I'm taking over as Armenia, screw both you guys in the east to west, and I'm going to create my own faction and emerge. But I guess at this point in time, westward, minor diplomatic bonuses with Roman factions there, a little bit more tending towards Rome, I guess at this point in time. Culture, nomadic tribes. So a couple of these, the Alani going to be coming in, the Britannic Celts, and then the Caledones. So those guys are awesome to see. And these guys, 25 ammo for ranged units, warlike people, plus 3 army recruitment slots in home provinces. So cool. We're going to be seeing some nomadic tribes moving around the lands. But one of the main things that they did introduce here is going to be the heroic faction. So this is really cool, and I'm really glad they introduced this. So essentially what it is they take the pick of the 10 playable factions, 5 are heroic. Those are going to be Rome, Gallic Rome, Palmyra, the Sassanids, and the Gothi. And essentially what the heroic factions are is they've been given more love and attention. So as they say here, they have grander and more elaborate victory conditions and unique named faction leaders who cannot die in battle. So this gets you tied in a bit more to the campaign. You have a bit more ownership of them. Heroic factions have their own flavored and bespoke event chains representing the tales of these characters' lives. I mean, this is pretty much coming out of the lessons learned from Warhammer. So for the historical people who've, kind of bitched and moaned about Warhammer, I always thought of Warhammer as a way to prove new mechanics, and the ones that were successful, they would port them over to history. So that's what they're doing here. I mean, more quest chains, faction leaders who you get tied to, so that's pretty cool. Bonuses to their abilities enable the player to make meaningful choices regarding the development of that faction. So that's really, really cool. In terms of different campaign mechanics, well, obviously, if this is a crisis of the 3rd century, there's going to be a lot going to shit. So the main ways they've decided to represent that are going to be banditry, plagues, cults. One of the big factors as well that I would have said that I would have included would probably be some way to represent the debasement of the currency, something tied to the economy, but I guess that would be I didn't want to get into that. It'd be too deep in terms of the campaign, and it doesn't really focus so much on. I don't know. You could say the same thing about cults and plague. So I'm not quite sure why I'm trying to make excuses. If I were to do this, I would have included some way to manage the economy, because that was definitely very important. Same thing goes with recruitment of troops, the availability of forces to staff your armies. That was something that would increasingly become a problem when you get to the late Empire. So the first one, anyways, of the 3 confirmed ones is going to be banditry. So this is almost like public order in the sense, but what happens here is if you have reduced government authority, banditry crops up, and then if banditry gets out of control, then essentially it will deplete your food levels, threaten faction-wide shortages. Higher provincial banditry can also trigger special bandit events to occur. I'm not quite sure what that is. But anyways, we'll hear more about this in the future, and you can drive down banditry with armies, special buildings, and I assume faction-wide bonuses and things of that nature. So that's banditry. Plagues is going to be another one. So plagues are going to cut across the empire, spreading to various places. When a plague hits a settlement, it hampers growth, impacts public order, and reduces income. Diseases can move between neighboring territories, spreading with army movements and along trade routes. And then you have to have sanitation buildings to drive that down. So that was a big factor, sanitation and the control thereof in Attila. And yeah, so that's going to be a big one. Yeah, controlling sanitation. Actually, in Rome too was pretty big as well. So yeah, plague is going to be a big factor, having more of their presence known, because in the 3rd century there were a lot of monster plagues that came and knocked out cities, and were just, you know, one more added blow to the Roman Empire. The last one is going to be cults. So this one's pretty cool. So what they're talking about here is the establishment of many cults in the 3rd century, one of them being Christianity, another one Mithraism, and the last one Manichaeism. And basically, these are kind of cool. They confer different bonuses, and essentially what's happening is they say that the buildings don't require any cost. And essentially, the way they've justified this is you're not, you know, the buildings themselves are going to be paid for by the disciples of that cult. All you're doing in building that structure is allowing the people to do so, as opposed to clamping down on it. So that's kind of a cool take on it. Anyways, permitting disciples to settle within your territory, makes cult bonuses relatively easy to attain. Cults spread foreign culture, bring disorder to your provinces. In order to remove a cult building, a significant expenditure is required, and a public order penalty is incurred. So that's kind of cool. So they're easy to get, but harder to remove. So that's kind of cool, and I like the way how it'll tie into the rise of Christianity. So that'll be interesting. So we've gone over the campaign mechanics. Next, they talk about new general skills. General skills have been overhauled and now allow the player to customize and specialize their characters in the disciplines of recruitment, combat, strategy, governance, and maritime proficiency. So yeah, all of that is going to be probably lessons learned from Warhammer. I really do hope that they change up the general skill tree. We didn't quite get an indication from here how they've done that, but I really do hope that they kind of make the skill tree look like Warhammer. It was way more intuitive, I found. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see an overview of that. New narrative technologies. So these are going to be tied to the specific factions and the story they're trying to tell. So for Aurelian, his technology charts the journey of an emperor who must reform the military and then unify and defend his empire. Zenobia tells the story of her rise to power, to Trachis. So basically it just goes through all of them and has that their technology is tied to the journey. So that's kind of a way to change it. Instead of like a quest chain in Warhammer, which is tied to, I don't know, getting legendary items and equipment, here the quest chain is more going to be tied to, I guess, technology, and this is the way you drive your story. So that's very interesting, and I guess it's kind of the way they did technology with Caesar and Gaul, where the technologies were you interacting with Roman politics and stuff like that. So yeah, very interesting. Updating building chains. Rome features a new administrative building for tax collection, new naval training buildings. Palmyra gets a new religious building chain. There you go. Armenia gains new religious building chains, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, a lot of new stuff. And then finally, they talk about new units. So a lot of these units we have admittedly seen before. I mean, a lot of these Roman legionaries are going to be our bread and butter, signature troops, legionaries, heavy infantry, and then mix that with some of the units that we saw in Attila. So not too much new, to be honest. But they are trying to add some flavors here and there. So, for instance, for Rome, for Gallic Rome, you have a difference of Gallic legionaries distinctive from Roman legionaries, Gallic axemen and longswords. So, yeah, we'll see. I mean, most of this is going to be, honestly, stuff we've seen before. The one that has me a bit more interested is going to be Palmyrene Rome. So this one is awesome. I love the Palmyrene Empire. Very interesting. Short-lived, but interesting nonetheless. Palmyra being its own kind of distinct political entity that kind of rose up and was ruling in the name of Rome and then finally broke away. So these guys having the ability to raise legionaries, but then also themselves, I mean, historically they were attested to having supplied, I think, about 8,000 archers at one point in time to the Roman auxiliary force. So they're well known for their archers, so it looks like they've gone ahead and included those as the Hamian archers, famous Middle Eastern foot soldiers. But then also Palmyra was tasked with defending the trade caravans, fighting off the Sassanids and other forces. So they were kind of, if you're fighting in the east, you have to have heavy cavalry. So they're going to have Palmyrene counterfacts, armored camels, and of course I would expect them to have some of the kind of desert tribe forces, light skirmishers, light cavalry, things of that nature. So yeah, that's kind of it. for the overview. I assume we'll be getting more gameplay and a lot of stuff soon, but for me this is very exciting. I was a little apprehensive about Crisis of the Third Century in the sense that we've already seen kind of a lot of the Roman period, and these are many of the same factions, but I love the twist they've taken on it. I like the revamp of the politics, the way secessions and civil war works, and I like the way they've taken kind of the unique faction leaders and the emphasis on character and story. One of the biggest elements that I appreciated from Warhammer is making its way into the historical title, so this is a proving ground. I like the UI changes that they've made overall. And yeah, no, I'm just overall very excited for this. So like I said, we'll be getting more news here soon, and we expect to see the overall release of this on the 30th. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Stay tuned for more. And as I said, stay tuned for some history documentaries. I've got some stuff cooking up, an episode, a Moments episode on Odenathus, Savior of the East, and then a follow-up episode after that where we'll be covering his death and the rulership of his wife Zenobia, who becomes the ruler of the Palmyrian Empire, and instead of paying deference to Rome, decides to break away. So we'll be having dual documentaries on that. And yeah, that'll be very exciting. So stay tuned for more. See you in the next one. Peace out.